What is life? Why am I here? How is it all connected? And how am I going to navigate this beautiful but crazy journey? I'm Sylvia and welcome to the Soul Sunshine Podcast. Today I'm talking to Nat Bristowe. Nat is a life coach who uses different modalities like NLP, timeline therapy and hypnotherapy to support her clients through their challenges and ultimately live a more fulfilled and happy life. Being diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, Nat was on a mission to find something to help her overcome this obstacle. A life-changing weekend put her on the path to first of all help herself and second of all understand that she might want to be doing this for other people herself. Fast forward a couple of years, she is now back to her full energetic self, empowering others to realize that they already have all the resources and answers that they need to become their best version of themselves. She helps people get clarity on their goals, dreams and desires and to identify the limiting beliefs holding them back from reaching them. As a life coach, Nat helps her clients to transform their mindset into one that truly believes that you can achieve anything you want. Nat is bursting with energy and is a truly inspiring being, and I'm so excited to have her here with me today. Welcome to the Soul Sunshine Podcast, Nat. So good to have you.
Thank you so much. What a glowing introduction. I feel like I should steal that and put that on my website.
Go for it. That's you. It's all you.
Thank you so much. It is an honour to record this with you. So thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So Nat, before we're heading into our conversation today, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So today we're talking about Nat's story. We are talking about her life in London, being diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, how she overcame it and why she made the move to Sydney. We are talking about her journey into becoming a life coach, focusing on mindset and empowerment tools, and how she is supporting her clients to achieve anything they put their mind to. We're diving deep into NLP, timeline therapy, hypnotherapy, and are unpacking how Nat works with these modalities in order to support people along their journeys. So Nat, at the beginning I usually tell people how we met, and we only just met this week, really, in person.
It was a wonderful meeting.
But I've heard a lot about you through our mutual friend Victoria, who's also just quit her job to become a coach, which is amazing. We'll have her on here soon enough as well. And she's always told me about you. And then when I was looking on your website and when I was looking at what you were doing, I was just really interested and intrigued in, the modalities that you bring together and how you're helping, especially women, but also men, out there reach their highest potential really. So I thought I need to reach out, have a chat and see if you're interested to come on here. And here we are, which is awesome.
Oh, it's so good. And as I said, such an honour to be here with you. So thank you.
Well, Nat, let's jump into it. Start by telling me a little bit about your background. What's your story? We can hear from your accent already that you're not born and bred in Sydney potentially. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I haven't picked up the Australian accent yet, but coming up to...
Me neither. It's all good.
I was hoping I would have done, but so almost in January I'll have been living in Sydney for 4 years. But my background really, I was living in the UK before here, which is where my family are from. And I used to work in the world of hospitality and specifically in the world of events, which I absolutely loved at the time. I worked for a great company and had great colleagues and everything was wonderful, although also not. And at the same time as doing that, I suddenly realised that I had this passion for fitness and decided I wanted to get my spin instructor qualification. And so I started doing all my PT training alongside work, and eventually got my qualification and started teaching. So this is about, throw this back to about 5 years ago, and I was working full time in events, which are really long hours and very fast paced, high pressure environment, very social, lots of whining and dining. And alongside that, I was sometimes teaching up to 10 spin classes a week, that wasn't every week, but it was sometimes up to that, which I wouldn't even really do now, ever. It is a lot on the body. And at the same time, I was also in a new relationship and I had great friendships. And I had, on paper, my life was literally a 10 out of 10. But my reality was I just couldn't really enjoy any of it. I felt like my head was in this permanent black cloud. It felt like this brain fog is the only way that I feel like I could describe what that felt like. Just very, very foggy in my mind and constant headaches and nausea and dizziness. But because life appeared so good, I kind of thought that I must be going crazy and I just had to push through. And it turns out that I, without really even realising it, I'd been going to the doctors for blood tests for about 3 years, every time with the same symptoms, kind of on and off, and nothing ever showed up. And then eventually we were at my parents' 30th wedding anniversary at a festival, and my body I woke up the second morning, no alcohol or any kind of substances in the system, but I woke up and I couldn't move. My body had gone completely batteries flat and
shut down.
Total shutdown. And I think it was my body just saying, like, you have to stop, you cannot go. So I couldn't even walk to the shower. It took 2 hours to try and walk 5 minutes. So my dad ended up driving me home and I couldn't really get out of bed for a few days, and then went to the doctor, who then diagnosed me with chronic fatigue syndrome, which he then said there's no cure other than rest.
So what is chronic fatigue syndrome for people that don't know? It's a
great question, because no one really knows specifically what it is. It's a label sort of given to you as a result of elimination. So they take away all the things that it's not. So it's not Lyme's disease, it's not rheumatoid arthritis, and they decided on chronic fatigue syndrome because it turns out that I had glandular fever at some point without realising it. And they think that kind of turned into post-viral infection, which then led to this kind of extreme exhaustion and possibly an autoimmune type issue. Yeah. But they don't really know what it is. So you're given this label and then told that there's no cure other than rest, and that could take up to 7 years. And at this point...
What went through your head when you heard that? Like living such an active life and, being really social, being really active, sporty, how was that for you? At
this point, I had actually already decided that I was leaving my job and wanted to move to Sydney. And this was in the August 2019. And I was meant to be moving out to Sydney in October 2019. And the plan was to just teach spin and work in the health and fitness industry in some capacity. And so I knew that that's where my passion was. So hearing that, honestly, it felt like my life was swept from beneath my feet in that moment. From someone whose number one value is health and fitness, to be told there's no cure other than rest was pretty devastating. Especially when, he told me I had to reconsider my dreams of moving to Sydney.
And you had a big move ahead.
Yeah, and so it was scary and pretty devastating. And I just was not able to accept that answer. I think that...
You're like, I'm sorry, but this sucks. I'm not going to take that.
I've got plans to move to Sydney in 4 months' time to live a very happy, healthy and active lifestyle.
Life to get on with.
So the diagnosis and need to rest for 7 years isn't quite going to make the cut for me.
Shame, yeah.
So I went on this, I think, thankfully, I sort of decided in that moment there had to be another way. Yeah. And I think I'm so grateful for that will. And I think it's because I had this thing of moving over here and, something, a North Star, you might say, to motivate me to do something about it. And so I went on this journey of kind of self-discovery and healing and did everything. I did kinesiology, crystal healing, I did a raw food diet for a month, meditation, yoga, and I think that all helped. But it was this 3-day brain training program that I went to, which was really the life-changing moment for me. And at that point, I basically learnt to rewire my mind and suddenly had this huge transformation and realised that I was focusing on everything that I didn't want, and that was having an impact on how I was feeling in my physiology. And as soon as I began to shift what I was focusing on and shift, the language that I was using with myself, my narrative, my inner talk, I was able to see some like pretty significant changes really quickly, and I was then able to move out to Sydney in the January.
So you were able to get healthy really quickly again after that weekend, and make the move just a couple of months after you were supposed to move.
That's
amazing.
Yeah.
So what do you think, and I know we're going to go into that today, but what do you think it is that you learned there? Like looking back at it now, how do you look at that, and how does that make sense to you, like in the overall picture, you know?
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's honestly, it comes down to our beliefs and the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. You know, we have to be so careful of those I am statements or I can, I can't statements, because however we define ourselves, those are our beliefs about ourselves, and we cannot operate outside the boundaries of our beliefs. So when you're constantly telling yourself, I am so tired, I have no energy, I can't get through this, I can't do that, you actually don't give yourself the opportunity to do those things. And so by just catching that,
it's manifesting the negative.
Yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely. And the problem is so many of these stories are run at an unconscious level. So, and what I mean by that is outside of our conscious awareness. It's just automatic thoughts which maybe once started conscious, but we said them so many times that they just run automatically without us paying attention to them, and they manifest our reality.
So looking back at that now, did you manifest your own reality in terms of the chronic fatigue syndrome?
Yeah, I absolutely believe I did, and I think that that's something which is really empowering, because if we take full responsibility of everything we create in our life, and I'm not saying that that a lot of bad stuff happens, which is outside of our control, but what I have learned and what I teach my clients and educate people on is that we always have a choice in how we choose to perceive that external event. You know, if you and I went to the same film, we would both walk out with two totally different experiences. Or if you and I had a conversation with someone, you know, I could walk away thinking, oh my God, that was just so boring, and you could walk away feeling completely enlightened. But if it was the person or the external event that made us feel a certain way, then it would produce the same response in both of us.
Yeah.
So when we take full ownership of everything we create in our reality, we then actually become empowered to choose how we perceive a situation.
It's really interesting when you're talking about that, because what comes to mind for me is when I had my first son. That was like 7 years ago, and I found the journey of becoming a mother and, you know, having my first child quite an easy one. You know, I know for a lot of people it's a big change, and I mean it was a big change for me as well, but you know, they struggle through those first kind of weeks. But I kind of always found it, I don't know, for me it was quite easy. I just didn't find myself having that challenge. And I remember like sitting together in a mother's group, and you know, some of the other moms going like, oh, this is so exhausting, and this is so crazy that I'm getting time for myself, and this and that. And then first I was just kind of listening, and then only when we started talking about it in more detail, I realized that we all had the same experience. Like, it was exactly what you said. It was how we were reacting to that. So for some of the moms, you know, sitting on the couch, having the baby on them, sleeping, was really exhausting because they felt like they couldn't go and do anything on their own or do something around the house or something. While I, in that moment, just sat on the couch and let the baby sleep on me and just really enjoyed those cuddles and that time together, you know. So that was for me such an interesting realization where I thought about it as well, that everything in life, it's just, I mean, of course there is, you know, like you said, things that are out of our control and things that are really bad, but at the end of the day, it is a lot of the time how we perceive things, or what sort of a mindset we are putting onto an event that is happening, right? And that was just one of the examples.
That's such a powerful example, and so much. And when you can actually pull those examples up, you can see in that moment that actually, no, I do have a choice in this. But we can only know what we know, and until we bring up what is out of our awareness into our awareness, that is like the first step, right? Because then we have an opportunity to address it. Whereas for all those other mums just saying it's so exhausting. They're not thinking about what they're saying, but saying those words already carry weight and a certain energy, which will kind of have that knock-on effect and cause them to feel more tired. Whereas for you, it was a really soothing experience and a really wonderful experience. So you'll be in a totally different energy vibration, and that will kind of continue to sort of, whatever you're putting out, you're getting back in return. So you are just in a different kind of field almost.
Yeah. So interesting. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into that even. But before we do that, so tell me, so you came to Australia, you arrived here, started working in the fitness industry, like you said. When was there a moment where you were like, I actually want to do coaching, I want to become a coach and, support other people on their journeys? Like, what was that aha moment for you?
It's such a good question, because I think that when I did this brain training program, I think after I did that, it certainly had planted a seed in me of how powerful our minds are and how we are so unaware of just how miraculous and magical we are. And so I think that definitely planted a seed. But I was on a mission to teach spin when I got out here. So as soon as I landed, I went to a spin studio and started training with them specifically 2 weeks into being here, and then started teaching 6 weeks later. And then I also got offered a job with a company which I really wanted a job with, but that got put on hold just before COVID. So luckily I had my spin job and I was able to go in and film the classes because we rented out all the bikes. But I then had a lot of free time over COVID, and I ended up doing various courses. I think I did a psychology or the science of happiness, which was a free course being offered. And I just really wanted to spend this time in self-development and learning. And I met this girl who turned out to be a coach, an anxiety coach. And as she was telling me what she was doing, I just had this deep knowing and feeling in me that this is what I have to do. I feel so aligned with this. And I don't think I'd ever really felt such a sense of kind of purpose before. Maybe with teaching spin, but I think that's because it sort of incorporates the coaching element into it anyway. And so I made it my mission to get my coaching qualification, and I decided that's what I was going to do. So I signed up to the same coaching program as she did, which kind of taught you how to structure a 12-week program, and you learnt, various tools and techniques for coaching. And then they outsourced something called neuro-linguistic programming, which is what I'm sure we'll go into in a moment.
Yes.
And ICF, which is a recognised form of coaching as well. And then I just have kind of opened myself up to this lifelong learning, I think, which all kind of coaches and practitioners kind of open themselves up to, because we're ever evolving and expanding, and it's wonderful.
Beautiful. I love it. And so now you consider yourself a life coach, and I just want to unpack that word a little bit before we go into the modalities, because sometimes I feel like that word gets thrown around quite a bit these days. So what can people expect when they come and see a life coach, because I'm guessing not one experience is the same as another, because there's the different modalities that then lie underneath it, obviously. But how would you describe yourself, what you're doing, to help your clients?
Yeah, totally. And you're right, life coach is such a big word. And I mean, I call myself a mindset and empowerment coach, which I suppose sits under life coach. I'd say that the role of a coach it's more outcome focused. So it's getting clear on what is it that you want, and then it's important to identify, your limiting beliefs and stories and patterns and emotions and memories that are holding you back from getting there. But it's not about sitting in the problem. It's about identifying, okay, this is a pattern, this is reoccurring, and it's no wonder that you've got this block from getting you to where you want to be. So let's identify that and then really look at how we can reframe that and shift that and let go of that old belief which no longer serves you, because a belief is simply, a thought that we've given value or meaning to, and it's our truth, it's our reality, but that doesn't make it the truth. So when you can begin to really pull out some of those deep-rooted stories and beliefs and really start to challenge those and realise that actually there's very little, if any, evidence to back those up, you can begin to sort of loosen the grip on those beliefs and begin to sort of transform them so that you really feel empowered to take the necessary action towards achieving your goals. So it's much more outcome focused, and it's always looking at what can I do to get to where I want to be. Because this is my favourite quote, and I say it so much, but we're never going to leave our pain behind, and our pain being our comfort zone, which ironically is often not comfortable at all, but until we see value in something greater. And even though our comfort zone is not that comfortable, it's familiar, so it makes it safe. So unless we have something like I had in that moment where I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, you know, my North Star, moving to Sydney to become a spin instructor, that was so motivating that I was willing to do whatever it took to get there. But if you don't have something to look forward to, then why on earth would you leave your comfort zone? It makes sense. So I think a lot of the time people actually don't really know what they want, and it's allowing them to kind of push past some of that stuff that's in the way, the walls they put in front of themselves, and open themselves up to different ways of living. And ultimately it's to really empower them to see the world through a more positive and empowering and inspiring lens.
There's something interesting that you just said, which is sometimes people don't really know what they want. Why do you think that is? And how can you help people, you know, to get to that place of actually knowing what their true purpose and passion in life is?
It's such a good question. Well, I think the problem, I mean, a lot of people don't know what they want because of social conditioning, and, you know, we often adopt beliefs from other people, often our parents. You know, between the age of 0 and 7 is where our brains are like sponges, and we just pick up on all the beliefs and values and attitudes of the people who are around us. And then we've got all the kind of societal constructions of what we should and shouldn't do. But those again are just other people's beliefs, which we adopt to be our own. So it can get pretty convoluted inside your mind, because you feel like maybe you want to do something, but God, I shouldn't do that because that would be really bad. Well, according to who?
Yeah.
But people don't ask themselves those questions. So they don't actually give themselves the opportunity to see what's on the other side. You know, when you're brought up in a world where you have to go and become a doctor, or you should go to university, you should go and do this, you follow it because it's been kind of ingrained into your system that this is what I have to do, and that's a belief.
In the Western world, it's that general thing of you go to school, you go to university. If you're lucky enough to be able to go to university, you know, you get a job, you find a husband, you have some children, you build a house, and I'm not sure what after that, but that's kind of that path that everyone's treading, right? That if somebody goes a little bit off that beaten path, it's like, oh, what are you doing over here? Or why are you not doing this? Or what's happening there? It's really interesting how people react to that as well.
Totally. It's fascinating. And it's no wonder that people are so fearful of stepping outside the realms of that, because you've been brought up to live life a certain way, and that becomes your truth.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if our children, because I feel like our generation has been experimenting a bit more with that given path, so to speak, but I wonder if our children and our children's children, if those generations are a bit more like, you know, we'll just kind of do whatever sparks joy and whatever
I hope so.
You feel like you want to do. And again, I mean, saying that obviously living in a very privileged country, being able to even have choices, you know, and
no, well, I do hope so, and I think you're right. I think that the world is changing, and actually, you know, there are so many entrepreneurs and people doing their own thing and taking a different path, and just generally there's so much more diversity and an acceptance of that, and I really hope that that forges, you know, a new way of being and an openness, because when there's more openness and more awareness of what's out there, there's more available to you, isn't there? There's more possibility.
And people can also be more authentic, right? And be more true to themselves, because you don't feel like you're getting judged by just doing something different.
God, fear of judgment is huge. And that's just a barrier we put in front of us. And if we didn't fear that, what would you do if you didn't have a fear of judgment or a fear of failure? You'd actually give yourself the opportunity to succeed. But we don't. We just put a barrier there.
So going back to the stories that we're telling ourselves, and that we are kind of making up in our own minds. Based on that, let's head into the modalities now that you're working with in order to support your clients. The first one being neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, which is very big on, language and the stories that we're telling ourselves and how we are talking to ourselves. So talk us through a little bit about that work based on those stories. And I think we've all known that and we've had this discussion the other day around, you experience something and then you keep telling yourself stories about that. You're living in the past while you're doing it, first of all, and then second of all, you're kind of putting layers upon layers upon layers onto that story that happened that might not even have been really accurate at the time, but it's just the remembering a certain event and just putting layers on top of that, and then suddenly you're sitting there with a story in your head that's making you anxious or whatever it may be without ever even having happened that way. So talk us through a little bit about that, and what is NLP, how does it work, and what's the benefit of it, I guess?
Amazing. Good question. Well, NLP stands for neuro-linguistic programming, which honestly I don't know why it's called that, because it's such a tongue twister. I know. And I feel like I say it and people are like, oh, no, okay, complicated. But no, it's an amazing modality. And essentially, it's the study of excellence and the study of what works. And it's just a massive toolbox with different tools and techniques that help to create positive change. And to sort of break it down, N stands for neuro. So that really considers how we interpret information and receive information in through all of our senses. So through what we see, what we hear, feel, taste, and smell. And then L is referring to linguistics, so the language component. So the words that we use and the words, how we assign meaning to those external sensory inputs. And then P is the programming. So the programs and strategies that we're running inside that produce our results. So the information comes in, we assign it meaning, and then that creates a response in our behavior. So NLP looks at how we can create some of the changes at that kind of trigger point, or how we can see things differently or reframe things in a way that allows us to experience that situation differently, so we show up the way that we want. And something which I find really useful in helping kind of explain why maybe exactly the same event could produce two different responses in two different people is because every single second we are receiving 11 million bits of information in through our senses. So through what we see, hear, feel, taste, smell, 11 million bits per second. And our brain can only hold 126 bits of information. And so you've got 11 million firing in, coming into you, but your brain is actually only taking in and holding 126 bits. So can you imagine how much information you're missing out on? For example, you probably weren't aware of the sensation between your bum and the chair until I pointed it out now. There's just so much that we aren't even aware of. And how our brain selects these 126 bits of information is through this highly intelligent filtering process, which is done at the unconscious level. And so that filtering process then deletes, distorts, and generalizes that information to make it simple, because obviously it's actually protecting us and making it so that we aren't completely overwhelmed by these 11 million bits. So it's really helping us out. And these internal filters are made up of our beliefs, our values, our attitudes, our memories, which hold on to our emotions. And what happens is all this information goes through this internal filtering system and then produces an internal representation, which then becomes our reality and our perception. So that's what we are seeing in that moment, what we are hearing, feeling, tasting and smelling. And so I'll use an example of my chronic fatigue. And what was going on there is, for example, I'd get invited to a party and my instant reaction would be one of complete fear. I would feel, oh my God, I can't go, because if I go, everyone's going to think I'm really boring and I'll just be too tired and I won't be able to show up the way that I want to, and then I'll have to leave early and everyone's going to think I'm so boring, and actually I just won't sleep well that night, and then I'll wake up the next day and I'll just completely crash and I won't be able to get through the day. Oh my God, how much energy being put into something that hasn't even happened yet. And when we have that internal representation, that's intimately coupled with a state, so what you're feeling, happy, sad, excited, fearful, and that's intimately coupled with your physiology, so what's actually happening in your body. So perhaps it's increased heart rate or slowed down breath, or maybe your hands start sweating, and that all combined leads to your action and your behavior, and in my case it was inaction. Whereas someone else, and my filters are, I have no energy, there is something wrong with me, social situations drain me. These are all my beliefs and filters, so my internal representation and perception is a direct match to those filters. Whereas someone else who's got a belief system which is, I love being surrounded by other people, socialising really energises me, meeting new people is such a great opportunity for me to, open myself up to other opportunities or whatever it is. I love going out to parties. Someone else with that internal belief system and those stories is going to get invited to exactly the same event, go through their system, feel really excited, maybe grateful, elation, really looking forward to the event, thinking about all the wonderful things, who they're going to meet, what they're going to eat, all the great things, and they'll show up in a totally different way from me. The same external event, but different, perception and experience of that. And so that is called the NLP model of communication. But I think that is a really good demonstration of, how we experience the world. And when we can begin to change those filters and those beliefs and those narratives and those memories to something more kind of empowering, that's in alignment with where we want to go, then you can see that we're going to experience it in a different way, which is going to have an impact on how we feel and our physiology and what's actually going on in our body.
And how do we change those belief systems?
So the first step is awareness. How can you possibly change something that you're unaware of? So beginning to identify, when you notice that you have responded to something in a way which in hindsight you can see that it didn't make sense to respond in that way, don't ignore it, address it. What about it made you respond in that way? What was going on in your head in that moment? What story were you telling yourself that caused you to feel that way? And you can begin to then pull up some of these unconscious thoughts and beliefs, and you can begin to reframe those. So, understanding that social situations drain me. First of all, a huge story which covers so much. Is that every social situation?
Yeah.
And is that actually true? Are there times when I could be in a social situation and I in fact feel really energized? And so it's actually beginning to question and challenge some of those. And it might be in certain specific social situations, they're not the ones I feel my best, and beginning to reframe your beliefs and stories around that, and maybe changing it to, I really enjoy being in situations where I've got my close friends around me, and beginning to just loosen the grip and find the evidence that supports that, so that you can begin to really build a case for this new story and narrative that you're telling yourself. And because it's got to be believable, right? It's changing these beliefs. So it might not necessarily be going from social situations drained me to I absolutely love going to every single party, because that's just that probably won't be believable.
Yeah.
But beginning to open the door to seeing it in a different way.
Yeah.
And then the other way, which for me has been the most profound, is through timeline therapy, which I suppose we'll touch on in a moment.
Yeah, we'll go into timeline therapy in a second. I just find the languaging so interesting in NLP as well, and the questions you're asking, because I find so often, there's always this question in NLP, is it always like this? The generalization around it, like just what you were pretty much talking about. And I find that so interesting because as humans, you find yourself so often saying that, oh, this always happens to me, or this is always that way, or that the word always just comes up so much. And after I did my NLP course, I just noticed it everywhere and with everyone, and I started pulling my husband up on it. I was like, so does this always happen to you? And he was just like, well, not always, but but it's just a word and a phrase that we 100%. Throw around so much, but that really subconsciously does so much to us without even realizing it,
100%, because the way that you use that word is attached to an emotion which has got charge on it.
Yeah.
And so even the moment you say, my God, you always do this, that holds so much weight and shifts how we respond. And it also, when someone says, God, I'm feeling so overwhelmed at the moment, and then I might say, what are you feeling overwhelmed by? Absolutely everything. Yeah. And that just feels heavy.
It's literally what heavy. I said to my husband on the weekend. He's like, what's going on? And it was literally like that. It was like, what are you overwhelmed with? And I'm like, just everything, like everything. But I literally felt like that on the weekend. Yeah. I just had this moment. And I've been sick the last week, I've been on my period, like everything happened at the same time. I had to work through it all, and at the end of the week I was just done. And he was like, what's going on? I'm like, everything, it's everything. And it felt like the burden of the world, a swim in the ocean made it all feel better, which was good. But it is that.
Oh, it's true, because also our minds cannot differentiate between what is real and what's imagined.
Yeah.
So when you're saying everything with that charge, as though you're literally talking about everything, you experience it like that. But actually, if you challenge that, everything? Is it everything? What specifically is overwhelming you? Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's always something specific, isn't it? Yeah. It's never everything.
No. And when you can break it down, you can see that actually, okay, some of these things are just really irrelevant and I can just let those go now. That's just taking up headspace. And when you really break it down, you actually see that, okay, it's absolutely not everything and this is so much more manageable. But so often people don't express what's going on for them, don't want to talk about it and hold on to it. And it's like a balloon just filling up and up and up. And actually so much of that is just wasted airtime. Literally.
That's so true, because once you're in that state, you keep putting yourself into that state to make it even worse, even though nothing externally actually is happening anymore on top of it. You're just making it bigger and bigger yourself, like the balloon. You're kind of blowing it up. You're putting your things in there and then you're blowing it up more than you actually need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you can actually be like, okay, what is it specifically, and break it down, it's just so much more manageable. So language is just huge, really become conscious of what language you're using to explain and describe your experiences, because that holds a lot of power over your experience of the event and your reality.
Yeah. You said the first thing is awareness and, changing language and, making those amendments. The second thing you said that is really valuable is timeline therapy.
Yes.
So let's talk about timeline therapy and let's explore what sort of situations that you would use that in. Like, what sort of problems are your clients coming to you with when you're like, that's where timeline therapy is a really good fit in order to make some of those long-lasting changes?
Amazing. I mean, I'm so excited to talk about timeline therapy because for me, it has been just incredible. So essentially, timeline therapy is an advanced NLP technique, and it's a process of active imagination and working with the conscious and unconscious mind. So essentially, like I was saying earlier, in our filtering system, we've got our memories, which hold on to our emotions, and we've got our beliefs along with values and attitudes. And what happens is that our unconscious mind holds like a photographic filing cabinet of all of our memories, and they hold our emotions. And so have you ever experienced that something happens and you are triggered and you just respond with this really irrational, highly emotional response, whether it's anger or sadness?
Yes.
And in hindsight you're like, that made absolutely no sense, but I felt totally out of control. And I think most of us probably experience that. And the issue is that we have never really been taught to express and process our feelings. Again, a lot of social construction around emotions show weakness. Vulnerability is a sign of weakness. Just crack on, just move on, just push past it. And actually, just like if you get a cut, which gets filled up with grit and you put a plaster on it, that's not going to heal it. That's just putting a plaster on it, putting it out of sight, out of mind, but that's going to get infected and inflamed unless you really allow it to clear out.
Yeah.
And so emotions are not the problem. Our feelings are meant to be felt. It's our body telling us, asking for attention and asking for something to be addressed. And sometimes there's not a problem and it's just being given the space and validation. And sometimes there is, and we need to address it in that moment. But what happens is we don't address it. We continue to put a plaster on it and push it down below the surface. But that emotion is still stored in our system. So something...
Because it's a lot of the time uncomfortable, right? Look at it.
Yes.
So people keep pushing it away.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's just move on. Let's just ignore it. But then something happens and it triggers this really irrational response and this kind of explosion. And so what timeline therapy does is it allows you to go back to the root cause of these emotions. So your major negative emotions, your anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, shame. And it allows you to let go of the emotion at the root cause. So I like to describe it like all of our memories are sat in almost genres of emotion. So all of our sad memories are together, all of our happy memories, all of our joyful, angry memories are together. And what you're doing is you're trusting your unconscious mind. And again, when I say unconscious mind, the main purpose of your unconscious mind is to protect and to preserve your body. It's the part of you that keeps you alive. It's what keeps your heart beating, your blood pumping, your breath breathing, your whole body regulating so that you can live. And so you can trust that it has the intelligence and the answers within you to get to wherever you want to be. And what you're doing is you're trusting your unconscious mind to take you back to the root cause. So you're highly unlikely to remember the first event where you first experienced fear, for example. It was most likely between the age of 0 and 7, but it could have been when your mother was carrying you. If she was incredibly fearful, that could have been passed down through her. Or it could even be past life or genealogical, if that is something that speaks to you. And so it's a process of active imagination and going back to the root cause, the very first event where you experienced this emotion, and then accessing and associating in that emotion just to connect with it, because you can't let go of something that you're unaware of. So just acknowledge it there. And then it's almost about taking the position of an observer and preserving the learning. So every significant emotional event that we have, there is something really positive to learn from that. Every event. And even though it might be really hard sometimes to find the positives, especially if you're experiencing it now, it can feel too raw to look for the positives. But in every emotional event, there will be something to learn from it. And if you look back on every challenge you faced, you will see that you learned some really important lessons to get you to where you are right now.
It's always easy looking back at it, isn't it? Like,
exactly.
It's like this happened for a reason and this happened because after that this happened. But it's so much harder when you're in the moment and when you're living through it. It's really hard to sometimes, keep that at the forefront of your mind, thinking this will be good for something,
Yeah, absolutely. But in hindsight, you can see that had to happen. And so you take the position of an observer and preserve the learnings, which will allow you to let go of the pain that you're holding whilst learning what it is that you needed to learn. Because our unconscious mind, stops us and holds us back from doing all these things. Or, if you're constantly finding that you're not able to get into a relationship, for example, you've got attachment issues or commitment issues, and you really want to get into that relationship, but you just cannot seem to get past that block. It's actually your unconscious mind trying to protect you, because you're going to have a belief there somewhere about being harmed if you opened yourself up to that. So it's about preserving the learning so you can let go of the pain that you're carrying on, trusting that you're never going to put yourself in a position where you could be really harmed, and actually that you'll be safe and you'll overcome anything that you're faced with. And then what happens, and here's what's so powerful about timeline therapy, is if I asked you now to recall a time where you were so angry in the past, you would probably, if you started describing that experience to me, you would probably access that emotion.
Yeah.
Whereas with timeline therapy, it's undeniable, because you'll go back to that experience, whether it was last week or 3 years ago or 25 years ago, and you'll be able to go into that memory as though you're living it now, and you'll recognise that there's no longer emotional charge on it. The memory is still there because it is part of you and part of what allows you to know who you are and where you've come from and where you're going. But there's no longer the charge on it. You see it through a different lens. And essentially what happens, if I take it back to that idea of all of our memories being stored in genre, by going back to the first event, I almost see it like if you imagine all of our angry memories on this string of pearls.
Yeah.
And when you go back to the first event, the root cause, and you let go of that, it almost...
It's like a domino effect.
Yeah, it's a domino effect. Yeah, exactly. And all the other events, the anger will shift as well. And so you'll then go in and test those and recognise that there's no longer a charge on it. You know, you will feel a shift within you. You'll feel a sense of lightness, most likely, especially if it was something you experienced a lot. And then when you think about a future scenario, which if it had happened in the past would have caused an irrational or inappropriate anger response, for example, you can go out and imagine that time, and you notice that you respond having taken on board all of these new learnings. So you come from a very empowered place with a choice in how you show up in that situation, and you're able to see it through a different lens, which means that you're able to show up how you want, in control of the choices you're making, rather than it feeling like you're being controlled.
It's beautiful, yeah.
So it's really powerful. And I do timeline therapy with limiting beliefs as well. You know, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of success. I'll never be successful. I'm unlovable. You know, I'm an impatient person. All of these things, just beliefs, which get in our way, but we take that as our narrative. That's how I define myself, so I will operate that way. Well, actually, when we're aware of what that is, how would you love to define yourself instead?
Let it go.
Let's let go of that.
Yeah. So that means timeline therapy really works with any sort of past experience around emotions and traumatic experience even.
Yeah.
As well as with, like you said, limiting beliefs and all the stories that you're telling yourselves on a day-to-day basis, really.
Absolutely. And actually you said something that it's incredibly powerful for trauma and phobia, because it doesn't require you to, it's not about reliving the event. It's not about going back into the trauma. It's just...
Because that can be re-traumatizing.
Yes, exactly. And that is absolutely not the purpose. So it's about just acknowledging it. And with trauma and phobia, you wouldn't even take them into the event at all. You would just take that observer position straight away, because we don't want to reassociate in that emotion, but just observe it, acknowledge it, and take the learnings and let it go. So it's incredibly powerful.
And it's interesting because thinking back of when we did the timeline therapy in our course as well, it was really interesting to observe how quickly people could get back into that place and how quickly people found themselves back into that situation, because there are usually situations and moments that really stand out in your life, right, that you can really quite vividly remember as well.
Yeah. And that's what's so powerful about timeline therapy, is it's undeniable. You know, if you ask someone to go back to a time where they felt so angry, that you could even ask them before, like, can you just think of a time where you were so angry? Not a really traumatic time, but a time, and you can literally see them beginning to like grit their teeth, and you see the whole physiological shift. And then afterwards it's just like there's nothing, there's no charge on it. So it's incredibly liberating.
Amazing.
And
then the third modality that you work with is hypnotherapy.
Yes.
And I'm really interested to hear a bit more about that as well, because I haven't personally, I don't think, that's what I said to you, I don't think I have experienced it. I've done lots of healings in my life as well and lots of different things, but I don't think I've ever actually really done a hypnotherapy session. So tell me a little bit more about that and how you work with that and how that unfolds in a session.
Yeah, I love hypnotherapy, and I think that a lot of people are very skeptical, and I can totally relate to that because I absolutely was as well. And I think a lot of people worry about it being someone controlling your mind or someone making you do stupid things like dance around on stage or quack like a duck or all those things. But the truth is it's like no one is ever controlling your mind. You're always in control of your mind. And essentially we're actually often in a state of hypnosis. It's a state of focused attention and deep relaxation at the same time. So you become much more open to suggestion.
It's like a meditative state.
Yes,
almost, right?
yeah. And, you know, we're actually constantly being hypnotized and hypnotizing ourselves with the stories we tell ourselves. We're accepting those to be our truth. It's the acceptance of a suggestion. And with hypnotherapy, it's about your client being able to follow the instruction of the hypnotherapist, and in order to do that there has to be a rapport and a trust in their intention. But it's about taking the client into a deep state of relaxation and focused attention so that they open up their awareness and are much more susceptible to suggestion, which will have been discussed together. So if I'm working with a client around public speaking, for example, it's understanding how do you want to feel when you get up on stage and getting a really good picture of what it is that they want, because it goes back to that language, right? If I'm feeding words back, which are the client's words, that's going to sink in much more easily. And hypnotherapy is about bypassing the critical faculty, and what that means is that's the part of you which cares to distinguish between what is real and what is imagined. So, for example, if you're watching a film about superheroes, you don't just stand up and say, that's rubbish, like, you know, people can't fly, this is just complete rubbish. You allow yourself to accept that that's what's happening so you can fully immerse yourself into the experience of the film. You know, other examples where we're constantly in a state is, do you ever get into a car and drive somewhere and suddenly you've got there and you're like, how did I get here?
Yep.
I just got here.
You've all done that.
Yeah, exactly. Or when you're watching a film or reading a book and you're just like completely absorbed into it, like nothing really distracts you around.
Or you have to reread a page.
Yeah.
That's weird as well, isn't it? You go like,
yeah.
what did I even just read
what
for the
did I
last
just
5
do?
minutes?
Yeah. And so with hypnotherapy, yes, it's about taking a client into a deep state of relaxation when they become open to suggestion and then feeding back intentional language that's going to allow them to get to where they want to be, because once again, it's planting those new beliefs at the unconscious level, and which are where all of our behaviours are driven from, which we've just spoken about. So it's incredibly powerful for stress reduction, it's powerful for changing habits, it's powerful for a belief change, fear, getting over fears. I worked with a 60-year-old man who absolutely loved walking but couldn't bring himself to walk by high cliff tops unless there was a barrier. And so together we worked a lot with hypnosis to create this imaginary barrier so that he felt safe to go and experience these wonderful walks. And he was able to do things that he wasn't able to do, you know, for 30 years of his life. And I worked with a 12-year-old girl who had separation anxiety from her mum and couldn't spend a night away from home. And we worked together to really start to shift some of those beliefs and feelings at the unconscious level. And my favourite call with her was when she'd had a sleepover and told me she was an expert sleepoverer.
Oh, sweet.
So you can really make some seriously profound changes, and I love using it alongside timeline therapy, because it's almost like your timeline therapy lets go of the past. You preserve some incredibly powerful learnings which have come from you, and then I feed those learnings back to my client. But other things are, you know, with insomnia, it's really, really powerful, and any kind of fear or phobia. I would usually use timeline therapy first though, and then bring hypnosis in to really kind of solidify all those beliefs.
Yeah.
But a demonstration of just like the power of suggestion. I think I mentioned this to you the other day, but it's not the most wonderful example, but I think it's a very powerful example of that mind-body connection. And when we accept suggestion, I was at home in the summer with my sister-in-law who had given birth about 6 months ago, and one of my really good friends was around as well with her also 6-month-old baby, and she was telling us about her birth, which was a really traumatic experience for her. And she was going into quite a lot of graphic detail to the point where I was suddenly really imagining it and picturing it and feeling very, very queasy in my body. And I remember kind of being like, could we stop this conversation? I think I need a breather. But the next thing is I've actually fallen off the bench. I've completely passed out. And I wake up to my sister-in-law, who happens to be a doctor, shouting my name. And she thought I'd had a mini seizure, and I'd actually just completely passed out and also completely wet myself, which might be too much information, but I think it does demonstrate how powerful our mind is and that mind-body connection. I accepted that, and I almost was playing it so vividly that it was as though I was experiencing it in that moment, and that is how my body responded. So can you imagine if that's the kind of response you can have when you're focusing on things which maybe don't feel so good or look so good, and start focusing on, you know, what you really want and how you really want to show up, you know, the confident, motivated version of you. And when you're really imagining that, can you imagine what's going on at, you know, at a physiological level for you, and how that's going to influence how you show up?
It's really interesting when you're telling that story as well, because that has happened to me in the past, that I've been so immersed in somebody else's story that it's literally physiologically impacted me, even though it wasn't myself. Like I was so in that story that I literally felt like I felt their pain.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, 100%. But that is so powerful, right?
Yeah.
That's not actually your pain, but you have the power to adopt that as your own and experience as your own.
Yeah.
And so when you realise that, when you can flip the script, and change the story, and, you know, to have empathy is a wonderful thing to have, but it's also not your responsibility to take on someone else's pain. It's being there but protecting yourself from taking that on.
What do they call it in NLP? It's like empathy versus ruthless compassion. Is it ruthless compassion?
Oh, I don't know.
I feel like that's what we've...
Yeah, well, but that's a wonderful explanation, you know, to be empathetic is a wonderful thing. But to, you know, no one, when I'm talking to someone about something that's going wrong for me, I don't want them to consume themselves in it. That doesn't actually help. And I think a lot about NLP is like not buying into your client's kind of story. You know, you want to empathize, but I'm not going to be here to pat you on the back and say, oh, don't worry, like that's so hard for you, because that doesn't help. And actually, you know, support circles are so wonderful in so many ways because you get that connection. But I remember when I had chronic fatigue and I would go into all the Facebook groups, everyone talking about their problems and people being like, I'm so sorry you're going through this. That was actually just really unhelpful. It just fed into that story, and then, you know, kind of built out that there's all this love and support, and it actually almost enables it more. And that's, you know, when I went to this brain training program, which was NLP, which I later found out, you know, I was in a group with a woman who'd had it for 23 years and had spent most of her life in bed. And she was walking by day 3, not fully, she wasn't like, you know, striding, but she was so much more active than she had been for years and years and years. So it doesn't matter how long you've had your problem, if you are willing to put in the work and to create the changes and to take ownership and responsibility for that, you can create results very quickly, as long as you commit to yourself and, you know, catching yourself in that language, because it all plays a part.
It was very interesting when you just talked about, you know, those Facebook groups that were supposed to help, but at the end of the day almost did more harm than help. But talk us through about that, because we've talked about that as well previously, and it's the secondary gain that people are getting out of being stuck in a story and not wanting to change it. So what is that all about?
Secondary gain is so important, because if your client has secondary gain, they're not going to let go of the problem. And ultimately what secondary gain is that they get more out of having the problem than they can see that they would get from letting it go. And to take it back to the chronic fatigue, whilst I did a lot of work in that time, I actually only let go of it when I did my master practitioner training and had my breakthrough, because I had secondary gain. And for me, it meant that I, you know, could justify why, or didn't have to justify why I was leaving an event early. People would just know that she's got something wrong with her, like she just needs to leave now. Or if I wasn't drinking at an event, you know, I felt like people wouldn't judge me. They'd just kind of be like, oh, like, you know, that's like absolutely okay, because you've obviously got something wrong with you. And maybe it was a feeling like I had more love and support around me if I held on to this problem. And actually, by learning that I can turn up to an event and choose to not drink without having something wrong with me, and I can say no to going to an event just because
you don't feel
I don't feel like going.
Yeah.
Or I can leave an event early because I've shown up and I've had a great time, but I'm ready to go to bed now. Not because anything's wrong with me, just because I want to.
It's your choice.
And so it's so empowering when you realise that I'm making these choices because that's what I want, rather than that's all that I'm able to do. And, you know, I've worked with clients who have held on to pain for other reasons. You know, a client who held on to physically, her period stopped because she was talking about having another baby, but actually had an underlying limiting belief that she wouldn't be in control of her body if she had another child. So her body was actually protecting her, not putting her in that position, because for the fear that she would lose control over her body. When we were able to identify that secondary gain and almost have a conversation with that part of her, being like, is it okay? Is it safe to let go of this fear and let go of this pain so that you can have a baby and still feel in control of your body? And when we were able to do that, you know, her periods came back. And,
Amazing.
you know, and our bodies do it to protect us. So when we can shift that narrative alone, rather than what's wrong with me, I need to be fixed, to my body is actually just so incredibly intelligent, it's just trying to protect me. So what are you protecting me from? And is there a way we can achieve the same outcome but without holding on to the pain? You know, it's really important as a coach to be able to identify that secondary gain. For what purpose are you holding on to this?
And it really makes me think how many of us are holding on to things just purely because of that secondary gain. There will be so much of that.
Because our unconscious mind won't, like, I always see it as our conscious mind is the goal setter and our unconscious mind is the goal getter. And so if I consciously know that I want to, I don't know, have a child, but unconsciously I've got a fear that I'm not able to get pregnant, or I've got a fear that I'm going to be a terrible mum, that's always going to override the conscious belief. So you just have to dig that out of your client and have that conversation so they feel safe to let go of that.
So the subconscious always overrides the conscious. Because it's the really deep lying stories and feelings that we've got.
Absolutely. So when you feel that kind of conflict, that's where you know that there's a mismatch and that there's something within you. So you can take it as feedback and an opportunity to be like, okay, what's going on here? Let's explore this. It's not anything to be scared of. It's actually just your body saying some attention needs to be paid to this. So honour that and explore it.
And it comes back to awareness again as well, right? Being aware that you're doing it out of a reason that might have not been that obvious in the first place.
Totally.
Beautiful. Nat, helping others in the way that you do, you know, in such a profound, energetic way as well, can also come at its cost. So what do you do personally in order to keep your, you know, mental health and well-being up to speed, and to really be able to show up, first of all, for your clients, but second of all, also for yourself on a day-to-day basis, you know, because, a lot of people are bringing issues and problems to you, you're helping them through it. How do you work with that?
Well, I have to say, I actually find the work that I do incredibly energizing because it is more outcome focused. So to actually be a part of that client's journey and transformation and experiencing their shifts is incredibly energizing and rewarding for me. So I actually feel that more often than not, that energizes me rather than you know, kind of drains me in the first place.
I love that,
But I absolutely love exercise. So I know that movement for me is really, really important in energizing me, and that's a moment where I just feel so present, especially when I'm teaching, but also doing my own thing and going to other classes or going for walks. And I mean, you know, living on the beach, having that as my life is a real kind of pinch me moment. Yeah. But my health is really my number one value, and I value, you know, good quality sleep, and I eat pretty healthily, but I do love an ice cream. And, you know, I feel like even, you know, seeing that sometimes as soul food, and sometimes the treats actually don't restrict yourself, like enjoy them because they feel really good, and savor those moments rather than have them and then feel guilty after. So
I had Sophia on the podcast a while ago. She's a naturopath, and she was talking about food from a mindset point of view as well, you know. And if you tell yourself that ice cream's bad for you, you know, you might be putting on a kilo while you eat it. 100%. But if you're telling yourself that this is good for you and that's enjoyable, and like you said, it's soul food, it actually makes you happy. So there's nothing wrong with it. And I really loved how she put that lens on even food, you know, being like, you can go and have a burger, you can go and have a pizza, it's fine, you know, as long as you don't tell yourself the story that, you know, you're going to be walking away feeling worse afterwards.
Oh my God, 100%. I feel like I could go on and talk about that for hours as well. But so I think for me, it's really getting out and about and getting outside. And that's what I love about living here, is that there's just so much outdoor activity available. And I think also surrounding myself with people I feel aligned with, and the people who really light me up. I'm very particular in who, like, I want to spend my time with, you know, who I want to surround myself with, and I'm very grateful for all the friends and people and support network I have out here. Yeah.
Beautiful. Then the last question, which goes back to the healing side of things. How important do you think the deep personal and collective healing is in this day and age?
Well, I think it is so important. I think that if we don't invest in ourselves and we don't give ourselves the space to heal and grow, we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to live a life that we truly want. And I think it's like 1 in 400 trillion chances of us existing in this world. So there is a purpose for everyone. And if we don't take ourselves seriously and prioritise our own healing and development, then we're basically feeding others from an empty cup, and that's going to lead to burnout and resentment. And so by filling up your cup first and giving yourself that love and that commitment, you have so much more to give yourself and to share with others, and you give yourself the opportunity to show up in the way that you want. So yeah, for me it's so important, and collectively, you know, to have those conversations with other people. I think that it can be very isolating when you hold it to yourself, but when you allow yourself to open it up, you also open yourself up to seeing things through different lenses, which opens up your awareness again and opens you up to more possibility. So yeah, really important.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Nat, for sitting down with me and talking to me. That was such a beautiful conversation, and still lots of questions in my head. Could talk to you about those
I feel like we could talk
forever.
For hours. So, yes.
But I do have to cut it at some point, unfortunately.
Oh no, that was so lovely.
But I'm sure we'll keep talking and exploring, and really love what you're doing and what you're bringing to the world. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you.
So besides all the amazing things that Nat shared with us today, the 3 main pearls of wisdom that I'm taking away from today are: the first one is, we're never going to leave our pain behind until we see value in something else. And that speaks very true to myself as well, thinking of, you know, past experiences where I wasn't able to let go of something or move on from something. And that is a sentence that has just really struck something inside of me. And I think it's a really interesting one to ponder on and see whether that might actually be something that's applying in your life. And how you can move on from certain things. Which brings me to the second point, which is awareness is the first step to change. And I think that is just such a good reminder, generally speaking, in terms of, you know, all the things we go through in life, and, you know, the fact that we can't help other people make changes, or the fact that we can't change other people, and neither can they, so they can't change ourselves either. And so it is always about having that awareness first, because before you can really go out and make a significant change. And how you can do that is through all the beautiful modalities that Nat has described to us today, NLP, timeline therapy, hypnosis, so many beautiful modalities in order to be able to look at the stories you're telling yourself, looking at the beliefs that you've put up with, and really starting to change them bit by bit so that you can live a more fulfilled and happy life. And the third one that stood out for me was talking about the secondary gain. And so the secondary gain is if you don't want to let go of a story or of a problem because there's something you're getting out of it, and that's why that problem is actually quite handy for you to have sometimes. So Nat was talking about the example about her chronic fatigue syndrome, and the fact why she was holding on to that was because she was able to say, I'm going to leave this body early, and it was okay because people were like, she's got chronic fatigue syndrome, so it's okay for her to leave the body. So that was her secondary gain. So just kind of starting to think about where in our lives we might not want to make changes, or we might not want to get rid of old beliefs, or we might not want to change old stories because we are actually getting something out of it that's quite handy for us to sometimes, have, is I think a really good thing to look at. So Nat, before we go today, tell us where people can find you, how people can work with you, where you're based, what's your availability, and how do people get in touch?
Amazing. Yes, I'd love to hear from anyone who's interested, and I always offer a discovery call, which is just a conversation. The most important thing is that, whoever I work with, they feel that I'm the right coach for them, and I also believe that I can help them get to where they want to get to. So it's really just an initial conversation. So you can find me on Instagram, which is just at Nat_Bristowe_coaching, or my email, nat@natbristowecoaching.com. And I do a lot of online sessions, and I also can do in person. I'm located in Bondi. And we also do have an upcoming women's mindset empowerment program, which I'm running with Victoria, who coincidentally is the girl who introduced Sylvia and I. And that's a 6-week program starting on Wednesday, the 15th of November. And it's going to be weekly on a Wednesday evening. We're only having 12 women. And it really is taking these women on this journey to getting clear on what they want, identifying what's holding them back, and really beginning to transform some of those beliefs so that they can start living a life that truly lights them up. So we're very excited to create this wonderful community of like-minded women. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to me. We still have some spots available.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nat. So do get in touch with Nat if what you've heard today spoke to you. If you feel like there's some limiting beliefs, there's some stories you're telling yourself that don't serve you anymore, have this discovery call and see what you can do together. See if you can work through them, see if you can let them go, and if you can move on to a more fulfilled and happy life. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I really hope that you got something out of this episode today. I learned so much again about, the different modalities that I was already aware of and the ones that I wasn't, and just so many good reminders in there around how our mind works and how we really have the power to change our thoughts and our language in order to really, achieve the things that we want to achieve. And we don't have to be held back in those old limiting beliefs and in those old stories, and we don't have to play small. We can out there and we can actually really reach all the things that we would love to achieve. Please do share the podcast with your family, your friends, or anyone you think might benefit from this information today. I really hope this episode brought some sunshine to your soul. I'm sending love and light your way, and until next time.